Okay, welcome everyone. It is my great pleasure today to introduce Reyhan Durmaz, who is the assistant professor of religious studies in the Department of Religious Studies of the University of Pennsylvania. She completed her PhD at Brown University in 2019, for which won her Joukowsky Dissertation Award in Humanities. Since then, she has held research fellowships at Dumbarton Oaks, at the Institute for Religion and Critical Inquiry of ACU in Melbourne, and at the Center for Orthodox Studies of Fordham University. You can find the results of her research so far in a string of articles in the Journal of Near Eastern Studies, Method and Theory in the Study of Religion, Harvard Theological Review, and I believe the Journal of the American Academy of Religion, among several other book chapters, reference entries, and a photographic archive of Syriac Orthodox architecture of northern Mesopotamia. Last year also saw the publication of Reyhan's first monograph, Stories Between Christianity and Islam, Saints, Memory, and Cultural Exchange in Late Antiquity and Beyond, with University of California Press. And today we get to hear from her work. Reyhan, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction. Thank you for your invitation. It's such a big honor to be here. And it's lovely to see some of you that I know, and lovely to see some new friends. One advantage of Zoom meetings is that you feel more connected, and I'm really very happy to see you all today. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, can you all see it? Great. So I will talk about now the life of Aḥo of Rishʿayno. I started reading this article exactly 15 years ago in Budapest with István Perccel, and then I had to take a break for a decade from it. And recently I'm back to this life for the research project that I'm doing right now. I'm writing a book about religion in the medieval Middle Eastern countryside. That's my broader question. I'm still at the very early stages of that project. And then in connection to that, I am returning to this life that I really liked a lot when I started reading it. And it's very interesting. It is understudied. And I hope you share my excitement here today. And I really look forward to hearing your thoughts about what I'm going to say about this life. So this is the life of a saint who allegedly lived in the late 5th, early 6th century on the Roman-Persian border. I am going to talk about the manuscripts that witness this life and the current scholarship on it. I will discuss authorship or potential authorship since it's an anonymous life and its broader monastic contexts. I will then walk you through this very interesting content. And finally, I will end with a few comments on the content, and hopefully I will be able to answer the so what question. All right, so the life of Aḥo of Rishʿayno, who is also known as Aḥo Aksnoyo or Aḥo the Solitary, the Solitary and the Ascetic. There are multiple titles that go with this life, but it is witnessed by two medieval manuscripts, Vatican Syriac 37 right here on the right, and then Mardin Church of the 40 Martyrs. There is, I think, a modern from 1903, a modern copy of the life, and I'm sure there are other modern copies. I'm still on the hunt, but I will mostly focus on this manuscript here, Vatican Syriac. And Vatican Syriac 37 is dated to the 16th century, but the folio we have this dating on is actually somewhere quite irrelevant, and it has a different hand. It is a very eclectic manuscript, so I actually don't know whether this date applies to this part in which the life of Aḥo is preserved. And Mardin manuscript is slightly earlier and 14th century, but it is also, the dating again comes from a different part of the manuscript, and it's a very eclectic one. And Vatican might be slightly later, but I think for now, I assume both of these versions are from the 14th century, more or less, but the life was edited much earlier than that. Okay. The earliest study on the life of Mor Aḥo is from 1956, as you see at the bottom of the clip here by Arthur Roberts. It is a very short book in which he summarizes the life and then comments on it and comments on it as a purely fictional life. So it is a very where am I going here? It's a very important work, but it's quite outdated by this point. Then we have a short summary by Thiers. And then in 1990, when Andrew Palmer published his Monk and Mason on the Tigris frontier, he refers to this life frequently, as you see in the references here, but he uses the life to incorporated into his broader reconstruction of monasticism in northern Mesopotamia. And he does not summarize the life or comment on it in any other way. Then we have another publication by Thiers in 2004 in his Saint Syriac. And in that, we have a short summary of the life again. We have one footnote that mentions life of Aḥo in this article from 2018. Elif Keser refers to life of Aḥo and in two places, again in connection to the history of monasticism and monastic buildings in the Turabdin area. I have an article from last year where I analyzed the episode in this life that is about relic translation, relics from Constantinople, in comparison to two other Syriac hagiographical texts, and that's again a very brief engagement with the life. And if you want to hear more about the monastery that is associated with this holy man, a good place to start is Hidemi Takahashi's article in the Gorgias Encyclopedic Dictionary of Syriac Heritage. You will also find more Aḥo in Syriaca.org. Just a brief note that there are at least two more Aḥos in Syriac hagiography. One of those Aḥos is a disciple of the renowned Mor Aogen, and these two Aḥos are completely different. Aḥo the Egyptian is different than Aḥo of Rishʿayno, but there is another Aḥo in Syriac hagiography, Aḥo of Arzon. He is sometimes referred to as just Aḥo of Arzon, who converted Armenians to Christianity, and he is sometimes referred to as a bishop. And I think these two Aḥos, Aḥo of Arzon and Aḥo of Rishʿayno, they might be treated separately in medieval Syriac literature, but I think they come from the same tradition, and they should be analyzed in connection to each other. For example, Thiers in this work it has an entry for Aḥo of Arzon here under entry number 33, and Aḥo of Rishʿayno is 35. In the middle, you have Aḥo the Egyptian, and in the bibliography he cites for Aḥo of Arzon, he's actually giving Verbus's work, which deals with Aḥo of Rishʿayno. So there is a confusion of which Aḥo, but I think those two are hagiographically related. So all this is to say there is not a lot of work, there is no translation, and there is no edition of the life yet. I just finished translating the life, and hopefully this talk will motivate me to finally write the introduction and talk to perhaps George Kiraz afterwards. But I'm very excited to have recently translated it and to be working on it, and happy to share it with you today. So what do we know about Aḥo of Rishʿayno? The answer is not much. I will start with the external evidence, and then we will see what we can tell about it by just looking at the text. Externally, not many texts refer to Aḥo of Rishʿayno. In the Khatmin trilogy, which was written anytime after the 9th century, or rather finalized anytime after the 9th century, earlier manuscript evidence to the Khatmin trilogy, if it is still accurate, and it is the 13th century. So it is quite a late text in its final form. And in it, we have one line that refers to Aḥo of Arzon, who instructed Armenians. So is this Aḥo of Arzon? Is this Aḥo of Rishʿayno? Unclear. It is just one line of a commemoration. Similarly, in Rabban Saliba's martyrology, again from the 13th century, we have two dates that tell us that the hagiographical tradition of Aḥo was well known by this point. January 25, we have the commemoration of Mor Aḥo the Solitary, who brought to us a piece of the true cross, and that is one of the most dramatic, most important episodes in the life. And apparently it was known and celebrated in the 13th century. And November 23, we have Hevoro. This is a misspelling that should be not Ein by a head, but Hevoro no, sorry, I'm reading the wrong word here. We have the celebration of Mor Hevoro, son of Theodoros, who was the disciple of Mor Aḥo. This tells me that by the 13th century, we have the full hagiographical tradition in circulation and commemoration in Syriac literature. Nothing earlier than that, as far as I know. An interesting silence is Michael the Syrian. He refers to a piece of the cross kept in Apamea in the late 6th century. He does not mention Aḥo of Rishʿayno. He mentions the monastery of Bnoil, monastery at Bnoil, that was associated with Aḥo, but he does not mention the holy man. Here I have a note. Michael Rabo reviewed the life of, or edited the life of Abhai, and that is an important detail because there are close parallels between life of Abhai and life of Aḥo. They are always, or most of the time, they are transmitted together in the manuscript side by side. So there is a likelihood that Michael might have edited the life of Aḥo together with the life of Abhai. If that's not the case, the life of Aḥo might have been edited in that same monastic milieu to which Michael the Syrian belonged, perhaps with the example of Abhai being available there. So there is a close connection between Michael the Syrian, the monastic community in Melitene in the 12th century and beyond, and the life of Abhai and his cult. I don't have much time to talk about that, but please ask me a question about it later on. So externally, we also have architectural and epigraphic evidence when it comes to the cult of Aḥo. He is related to or associated with the monastery of the Holy Cross in Bet El. This place is also known as Bnoil, and the monastery was not named after Aḥo, but after the cross he allegedly brought from Constantinople Holy Cross. There is another monastery of the Holy Cross right here, and please take a note of that because I will refer to that monastery as well. As you will see on this map, there is a monastery associated with an Aḥo here in southern Turabdin, but that was probably the Aḥo who was a disciple of Augen. So we should be distinguishing between those two monastic traditions. Okay, so what do we know about this monastery there? It currently houses the tombs of Aḥo and his disciple Heboro. And it was a bishop's residence from the 11th century on. So it was quite an important monastery. And it was known as the Monastery of the Cross, Bnoil, in the 11th century. So the tradition of Aḥo bringing the true cross might have been in circulation by that time period. We have two inscriptions published by Andrew Palmer. Here, one of them, he dates to the 8th century. It is undated itself, but it just tells us how a new Bet Kadishe was built at the monastery. So the monastery was probably expanded in the 8th century, and perhaps that is a context in which we could find the life of Aḥo being either authored or edited in addition to or in connection to those developments at the monastery. And we have a well-dated monastery epigraphic evidence and another inscription from the 11th century. And that also refers to an expansion of the monastery. So we can more securely date things to the 11th century at this monastery. So I am inclined to also date the life or situate an earlier version of the life to around the 11th century, although it can be anywhere from the 8th to the 11th. It's really difficult to date, and I welcome any thoughts on that. And as you see from these photos, some from Gertrude Bell and some more recent by Mark Del Cogliano, the monastery is still active. It has been rebuilt. It's one of the major sites and major monasteries to see in the Turabdin region. So spectacular place, and it is only expected that the life of Aḥo was in circulation as this place was built, rebuilt, expanded over the centuries. So that is the external evidence. We have some epigraphy, some architecture, and some external literary references to this holy man, but not much. So now I want to transition to talk about the life itself and what the text tells us. And in terms of the plot, we can talk about four sections. The early life of the holy man, his family on the Roman-Persian border. Then after quite an extensive section, then we have the founding of two monasteries in Turabdin by Aḥo and his disciple Michael. I will deep dive into this section, so don't worry about them right now. So founding two monasteries in Turabdin, and then Aḥo travels to Armenia and then to Constantinople and back to Armenia. He converts pagan Armenians, or at least a community of tree worshipping Armenians, to Christianity with the true cross that he brings from Constantinople, and he stays in Constantinople, he stays in Armenia, and he dies in Armenia. He's buried there. And then in the last section of the life, we read about how his relics were transferred back to his monasteries in northern Mesopotamia, and how the monasteries flourished and revitalized after those relic transmissions. All right. Now, I want to very shortly go through these 4 sections to give you a little bit more about what is happening in this life. In these first 4 folios, we have a story of a family tragedy where we read about Aḥo, his 2 other brothers, his mother and father, very happy Christian family on the Roman-Persian border, and the life dates. The text says this all happened in the days of King Marcian, but he also says that the Persian king was Kesrun, and that chronology doesn't quite match up. For all that we can say, this dating here, this early note here about all of this happening in the days of Marcian might be a later addition. So chronologically, it is the text itself doesn't give much clue other than situating the saint in this late antique borderland area. In this section, we read about Aḥo is taken captive by Persians, while the rest of the family goes to Akko, and they start a new life without him. They're all fishermen. They settle in elsewhere in the Mediterranean, thinking that Aḥo must be died. In the meantime, Aḥo serves in the Persian army as a crypto-Christian. He finds another crypto-Christian, Michael, and the life describes how Michael had a little cross in his helmet, and each time other soldiers were venerating the idols, it was the prayer time, he took his helmet off, put it behind his face, and venerated the cross. So that religious diversity in the Persian army and how different people navigated that that context to venerate their own gods is narrated in quite a vivid detail. Then Michael and Aḥo bond, and they ask the king to let them go, and they start just traveling together and giving alms, helping the poor, and just living as 2 ascetics. The life says it looked like soldiers by day, but they were like monks at night. So it is a typical trope of this crypto-Christian who is traveling at the beginning of his ascetic career, but the life keeps it very long, and it gives one detail after the other, how their soldier uniforms were encrypted with their initials, and how what they carried on their horses. So it gives really interesting, very vivid details. Finally, they come to Nisibis. They leave the Persian land. They call it the land of pagans. They leave the land of pagans, and Aḥo and Michael come to the Roman land, and they come to the area of Nisibis. And that is where we start reading about the monastic foundations, which is at the heart of this this Taşito. So they meet, Aḥo and Michael meet a certain landlord called Theodoros. He's called the believing Theodoros. So he's portrayed as this believing Christian who had a mute son, Hevoro, and Hevoro is healed by Aḥo and Michael. Very again, stock tropes are employed in this life, and as a gesture of gratitude, Theodoros builds a monastery for these 3 men, Aḥo, Michael, and Hevoro, at a place called the Mount of the Turks, Telo de Turkoye. This becomes the major monastery of these holy men. And this toponym, to my knowledge, does not appear anywhere else. In the Chronicle of Zuknin, there is the Taro, that the Turkoye, so the gate of the Turks. So the term the Turks is used to refer to various geographical locations, but the Mount of Turks is not. So I don't know what to do about that, and I welcome any thoughts. This monastery flourishes on the Mount of Turks, and at some point Aḥo wants to go to Jerusalem, and he leaves the monastic community, and he starts traveling. He goes to Jerusalem, and unlike most hagiographical texts, this part takes literally 2 lines. He went to Jerusalem, he prayed in sacred places. No landmarks are mentioned, nothing mentioned. Aḥo just goes there and then moves on, which is a very interesting detail for me, and I will mention that again further down. After Jerusalem, Aḥo goes to Akko, and he travels along the Mediterranean coast, which is where he reunites with his brothers. So the author interviews the family back into the story, and we are again switching. We are here switching from the monastic story to the family story. He doesn't only reunite with his brothers, but he comes back to his monastery, and his mother follows him, and she joins the monastic community. She serves there, and she finally dies there and is buried there. So it is very interesting for me to see that family life is not left at the introduction of the story, but is just brought back to his story again in quite detail. Aḥo returns to his monastery, and as I said, his mother follows him. After this family episode, we are back to the monastic history, and Theodoros founds a second monastery for Aḥo and his now many disciples in a place called Bno Il. It is called as such in this life, and that is how we tie this life to all of the material evidence and external evidence we see about this monastery. The monastery is not called the Monastery of the Cross or even Monastery of Aḥo in this life. It is called the White Monastery because Hevoro means white, and the monastery is named after this disciple. And the upper monastery at the end of the life is called Dairo Dafnot. So none of them are referred to in this life with a toponym that we know today, other than Bno Il. There is not a lot of anchoring points between the monastic topography of Turabdin today and the topography that is described in this life. Dairo Dafnot is supposed to be the upper monastery, the bigger monastery, and Bno Il is supposed to be the smaller monastery that was built later on, lower monastery. And perhaps and I wonder what Elif thinks about this, but perhaps Daphne and the monastery of the Holy Cross in Daphne might be a relic from this time when the monastery there was called Dairo Dafnot. Just a speculation, but I need to just go back to literature and think about that more. An interesting detail in this section is when the local commander patronizes this monastic community, especially the one at Bno Il, and he builds a portico there, and perhaps a 9 arches arcosolia made of 9 arches, and a number of burial niches in that room, and another charnel house. The Demetrius, the Roman, extensively patronizes this monastery, and this is the section which is frequently cited in the scholarship on the architectural history of Turabdin, because it describes those buildings in quite interesting detail by giving a list of these things that were built with the patronage of this soldier there. And Demetrius, in the end, is buried at the monastery as well. So those the second section with the foundation of two monasteries is full of these architectural details, and it is also a great narration about religion in the countryside. Let me just go back to here. A religion in the countryside through farming practices and through these different gardens of the monasteries and different monastic practices of singing and prayer at night and in day. So we have a great vivid picture of religion in the countryside, of course, with a big question mark whether we can take this as historical or not, and we will also return to that question. In the third section, after his mother dies and after Theodoros, his first patron, dies, Aḥo gets very depressed, and he leaves. He crosses the river Arsenos and goes to the land of the Romans, which is where we realize that the monasteries he built in northern Mesopotamia, the author thought about that area as Syria or Jazira, and there was the Persian land, remember? So now he moves to the land of Romans. So these geographical divisions is quite interestingly laid out in the life. In here, just like Theodoros on the other side of the river, he befriends Maximus and Drusilla, two Romans, and they too extensively support Aḥo. From their house, he travels to Athens of the philosophers. This term is repeated in the life of Abhai. That is one of those expressions that connect the two lives. I don't know if Athens of the philosophers is repeated in another Syriac text. Athens of the sophists is used in John Rufus, but this one is shared by those two Syriac lives. From there, Aḥo just passes through there. We don't know what happens in Athens, but from there he moves to Constantinople and he lives there for 5 years. At the end of those 5 years, he acquires a piece of the true cross at the Ito Katoliki, the life says. It is most probably referring to Hagia Sophia, but the emperor is not mentioned. No landscape is mentioned. We don't know what he does for 5 years in Constantinople. Again, Constantinople, just like Jerusalem and Athens, kind of become these vague places in the background of the life, while Aḥo does these very important things in the forefront through his networks and through his friendships. So here he acquires a piece of the true cross. It is narrated this way. The two of them, Aḥo and the caretaker of the great church, enter the church, and then he receives a piece of the true cross. He wraps them in pure silk and herbs, and there's a reliquary that he hangs around his neck, and he comes back to Hadas and back to the house of his patrons. So very short episode, but it's a very important episode because bringing a piece of the true cross from Constantinople, to my knowledge, does not occur in any other Syriac text. Life of Abhai mentions hundreds of relics the saint brings back from Constantinople to deposit at his monastery in northern Mesopotamia. So again, Abhai and Aḥo share that, but not the true cross. So this is a very unique episode in that way. Soon after he comes back to the house of Maximus and Drusilla, Aḥo crosses again another river, goes to Armenia, where he sees this pagan festival of tree worship, but also it sounds like a big orgy. It is all kinds of promiscuity and all kinds of dances, and there is 4 pages of description of this pagan festival. In the end, Aḥo uproots this cultic tree with the power of the cross. So the true cross is used in the context of converting Armenians. And he invites Bishop Kyriakos of Militere to baptize these new converts. This connection is also very important. Kyriakos of Militere, he's actually referred to as a metropolitan, not bishop. So this person is not attested elsewhere in Syriac literature, but it is quite interesting that the bishop to baptize these Armenians comes from Militere, which again ties back to Michael the Syrian and his context, his monastic context in the region of Militere. Finally, Aḥo dies in Armenia and is buried in Armenia. Just want to show you how this pagan cultic tree, this episode was important for the author. I skipped a folio here. It is 4 folio long, and you see Bishop Kyriakos in here. So the festival is narrated in a really gory detail, and it resonates with the episode where a cultic tree is uprooted in the story of Bishop Paul of Kantos and priest John of Edessa. Not no close parallels there, but when it comes to uprooting the cultic tree and describing the pagan festival that is happening right under the tree, these 2 texts are interestingly very detailed and keep that episode very extensive. All right. And in the 4th section, we read that the Syriac monasteries founded by Aḥo are destroyed by hail and other disasters. The author narrates this with, in quite, of course, in a mournful way, and he says they were just they just planted some cucumbers and some melon, and they were that was their plants. In comparison to the earlier times where the monasteries had pomegranates and fruits and nut trees. So he just gives us a list of smaller and less nutritious plants, just to highlight how bad of a condition the monasteries are in. And at this point, Hevoro and other inhabitants of the monastery go to Armenia after a lot of struggle. They bring his relics back to Tur-ab-Din, and after that, the monasteries regain that earlier glory. And he says that is why, because the monastery just returned, the monastery is now called Dairo Dafnot, and the new head of the monastery is also called, is named to be a certain Elio. So that is the story that we are looking at. Let me reiterate how interesting to me that the geography is very local. For a moment, he goes to Jerusalem. For a brief episode, he goes to Athens and Constantinople. So the author is aware of this broader global Christian geography, and he does his due diligence by bringing these places into the story. But most of the story takes place right here in northern Mesopotamia, Amida, Militene, Nisibis, Rishʿayno, Arzon, and multiple villages around these on both sides of the Tigris are repeated again and again. So the life has a very local hagiogeography in mind. So what is interesting? Some of the general observations that I have for this life. First of all, it is written in a very simple language, and it's a simple story. As I mentioned, some of the episodes, like the travel to Constantinople, travel to Jerusalem, and other episodes, are all simply narrated. Even his miracles are just, most of them are healing miracles. Just one of them is uprooting the Celtic tree. But other than that, we are reading a very simple story. And there are very short biblical quotations, mostly from the Gospel of Matthew. I'm sure I'll find more. And there are vague allusions to biblical episodes and characters. I just want to show you some examples here. Very well-known quotes, like "It's not possible to serve two lords," or "If there is belief as big as a mustard seed in you." So these well-known biblical verses are referred, but there are no. The author does not flaunt his knowledge of the scriptures. And there are vague mention of biblical events and characters, as I said. When Aḥo dies, the author says people of Armenia mourned his death like Jews mourned the death of Aaron. So if you know the story, it's great. If you don't, it is just briefly mentioned through an allusion of that sort. So simple language, simple story. Another interesting detail is that there are no theological expositions, except for that opening words about how, not Morris, Marcion, divided God into two natures. Other than that part, here I'm showing that to you, who blasphemed against God and the Holy Spirit, and dared against the birth of God, the Word, and divided him in two natures, and acted wickedly against the Orthodox belief, and shed pious blood. Except for this, there is no theology in the life. Even as I said, the miracles are very simple. There are no fights with demons or demonic beasts. There is no such spiritual drama in the life. And as I said, this might be a later edition for all that I can tell. The other interesting broad observation is that no reference to any imperial figures other than Marcion at the beginning. No spaces in Constantinople is mentioned. No mention of any landmarks in Jerusalem. The only broader connection that is highlighted here is to Melitene, through the friendship of Aḥo and Kyriakos. And just to show you that this is his visit to Jerusalem, and of course in many other Syriac hagiographical texts, you will remember that these episodes of travels to Jerusalem are narrated in quite detail, but the author took much longer time explaining how sad the monks were to let him go. That part is very emotional. They cry. They accompany him to the gate of the monastery. They don't want to let him go. There are these dramatic speeches about that separation and how both parties are extremely sad. But once he goes to Jerusalem, he was dead. That's it. So that episode is kept really relatively very short compared to what is happening right before his leaving his monastery for Jerusalem. And again, the only connection is to Melitene, and that is an important detail. Do I have that? Yes. So here is Kyriakos, Metropolitan of Melitene, and that is again tying our story back to that monastic milieu. And finally, the rather highlight of this life is very much that local geography in northern Mesopotamia that is marked by villages, monasteries, farms, and famous households, their lands, and the very intricate relationship between healers, soldiers, landlords, pilgrims, workers, shepherds, monks. So the life is very much interested in that rural expressions and forms of Christianity that is shaped by the farming practices, and what kind of crops do you get, and what happens when it hails, and whose healing works better, and what kind of diseases people are scared of, and how do shepherds work between monasteries and villages, and how they intermediate between the two, how monks and their singing at night meant that the beasts were repelled away with that singing. So more than or as much as the spiritual protection, the actual protection from the beast was also important for the author. So we see a very rural, very local life. So I am reading this life with an attention to those details, but of course, all of that might be fictional, and I do not take it to be a historical story, but it is one of those rare texts that tell us something about religion in the countryside, and that is why it's very, very interesting for me to just dig into those details about different plants and fishing practices, and what happens when a river dries out, and events of that sort, and how monks work in that landscape where there are other religious experts as well, such as bishops from important cities, other itinerant healers, and of course the simple believers who sometimes patronize buildings, but also sometimes they seek healing where there is nobody to turn to. So I will stop there, and I welcome your thoughts, pushback, and any other questions that you might have. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Reyhan, for this very interesting presentation of an unknown text. I welcome your questions, so please just write in the chat or raise your hands if you have a question. I would start to ask a question concerning how realistic are these descriptions? And I was thinking, especially in the pagan feast, when you describe the pagan feast, all this space given to this episode, is that realistic, or is more an ideological reconstruction? And how about the rural life that you mentioned?
Right. So I think that part is, of course, is fiction, and I don't think there were such tree worshipping practices in Armenia, especially not by the 11th century, or that is pure fiction. And in that fictionality, we can of course see the rival churches, and how Melitene and the monastic and clerical tradition that is tied with Melitene claimed a certain authority over Armenia. So that episode, in all of its fictionality, should be tied to the relationship between East-West Syriac and Armenian churches in the medieval northern Mesopotamia. That is fiction. But when it comes to the farming practices and other rural events that are happening, how monasteries were given, for example, a piece of vineyard, and how monks work more during the summer, and how there's a certain time in the year where there is not much more work to do, and there's more hail, so they have to navigate that risk and other potential dangers. So those details even if they did not happen in the case of this particular this monastery, I think those details can tell us about what the author knew already from his own rural context. So I take the farming practices and other religious practices in the countryside as close to reality, and with some potential to help our reconstruction of the medieval Middle Eastern countryside. But the tree episode is pure fiction. It is really great fiction, though. It is very, very vivid. I don't know why that vivid. And I understand, of course, that is to establish veracity and to dramatize the story. I understand all of the theoretical reasons, but it is still such a good read. Why? 4 pages of a pagan festival.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see there is another question by David.
Hello, thank you very much for a fascinating account of this text. 2 quick things. One, I don't think I saw in the bibliography the article by Aḥo Aksnoyo, who in 2013 himself announced that he was publishing this text. And I don't know whether he's now stopped or other things have gotten away. But if you haven't already, it would obviously be a good thing to get in touch with him, so you don't just both bring one out at the same time, although you may have very different approaches to it. So that was the first thing. I think it was in the Studia Patristica for about 2013. The second thing is, I mean, you mentioned whether the text is historical. I mean, I suppose it's historical at some point, in the sense that even if it's not actually set in the 5th century, which I imagine it almost certainly isn't, it was written at some point. And if you want to make some use of it for agricultural practice or monastic development or what's there, don't you need to narrow it down? Even if you're saying it's within, I don't know, the 7th to the 9th century or the 7th to the 10th century or whatever the dates are that you come up with. I mean, clearly there are things like the Emperor Khusro, the Shah Khusro is mentioned, and that's entirely kind of anachronistic at that point. Even the relic of the True Cross, it'd be quite interesting to know when relics of True Cross were thought to be circulating. Mostly they seem to circulate after the return of the conquest of Jerusalem, much later period, and there's the return after that. But I'm not a specialist in that. But there must be kind of elements like that one can use to factor in, as it were. That made a very long question. I'm sorry, and it's a bit clear, but bit unclear. But I'll be interested to hear what you say.
No, absolutely. So Aḥo, I actually got in touch with Aḥo Aksnoyo. I didn't know his article, but I heard that he was translating the life. I tried to get in touch with him. I will try it again. And thank you for reminding me to do that. And you're absolutely, and in the article that I published in just last year, I do get into the details of those dating issues and possible a narrower context. And you're right that it makes sense to situate it in 11th, 12th century, at least this version of the life, to that milieu where there is a cross in Edessa and another cross is claimed to be in Armenia. So there is a new cross economy in the Middle East, and this life is very much participating in that. But by the 11th century, this life must have done that because the monastery is known as the Monastery of the Cross, and it's a bishop's residence. So I'm willing to place this more in that milieu, 11th century, at least the version that I have it right now. So that is all I can say right now. Between 8 and 11 is too late, but if I have to choose between the two, I think 11 is more secure for this life than anything earlier. And that time is also very interesting to know what is happening in the countryside, when all we hear, or most of what we hear, is about these clerical centers and monastic centers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the phrase "economy of the cross." That's a new one to me, but I like that very much. The Athene of the philosophers you'll also find in Thomas of Marga in his Life of Abraham. So that gives you also know. dating feature.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. I see there is a comment by Nicholas, if you want to jump in, and then I have a question.
No, just a short thing. I think Qawme Sami Dik wrote his master's thesis on Aḥo at Marlin University, and especially
Thank
on the
you.
buildings built for him.
Right.
So
No, the buildings have been, this is wonderful. I will get in touch with him. I didn't know. And the buildings have been studied, and I'm so happy to see that other people are continuing to study the buildings. There's still so much to say on the architecture itself, and the life is very much helpful in thinking about architectural practices. Even if we can't take Demetrius the Roman as a historical figure, the life is, I think, very interesting in that. My aim is to one, make this life available, but also I'm interested in the question of religion in the countryside and the question of what I can say based on lives like this. So I'm so glad that work on architecture and the buildings are continuing. But thank you so much for giving me the name.
Thank you both. I have a question, then Georgia, then Dan. So my question is very basic, like these two witnesses that you mentioned are the only witnesses we have of the life?
As far as I know, I'm still on the hunt, so I'm hoping I can find more manuscripts. I know there are modern copies, so there is that. But from anything medieval, these 14th, 15th century manuscripts, these two are the only ones I have. Crossing fingers for more witnesses, though.
Thank you. And then Georgia, and then Dan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this fascinating presentation. Also, my question connects to Valentina's one. I was wondering whether we were going to discuss more the manuscripts themselves, because if I got what you said correctly, the Vatican manuscript has other text with it, it has different handwriting. So I was wondering with what other texts this life is transmitted, and whether the two manuscripts have different episodes, different big differences.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I was hoping that somebody else about the Vatican manuscript, because it is a fascinating manuscript, and it has 6 different hands. It's very eclectic. It's all rebound, so it is very difficult to work with. But the section where the life of Aḥo is actually a section. The same hand copies life of Abhai that I mentioned previously, that was edited by Michael the Syrian, and other writings by Michael the Syrian. So it was either for some reason just ended up being there, the life of Aḥo just coincidentally with Michael the Syrian's writings, or he circulated as one of his hagiographical editions. So that section is, to me, super interesting. And yeah, it is not a very organized section, so I can maybe actually show that to you. I will show you the Vatican manuscript. So here is Vatican Syriac, and the life starts, where is it? Bear with me for a second. So the life starts right here, 176R. Here's the incipit. And then here ends, right before it ends, the life of Jacob of Serug. And then here is the life of Jacob of Serug. And then here is actually a continuation of the life of Aḥo, right? So the life goes on until 192R, I think, and then comes back here, continues here, and ends the end of the life is right at the beginning of the life. So it is very, very irregular. The manuscript is very irregular. And as I've shown, this is Mor Yaqub's Tash'ito of Jacob of Saruk is right before the life of Mor Aḥo, but in a slightly different hand, at least more irregular. And then if you scroll down, you see an account of Constantius II, and then life of Abhai will come at some point, but this hand you will see that is slightly different than the hand that wrote the life of Aḥo. This is more regular, but content-wise, the previous ones are Michael Rabo's writings. So this is the Vatican 37. The rest of the manuscript has writings from Dionysius Bar Salibi and other writings from, again, 12th, 13th century authors. So for some reason, life of Aḥo was bound with these writings.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both. Before jumping to Dan, who has a question, and then Ekaterina, I think, has another question. Nicolas shared that there is an edition, like a Syriac edition of the text, I think, in the chat.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to say something about that.
Yeah, I just checked now. There is an edition by Daireto Hana Son with many lives of saints, and I checked now, and there is also Mor Aḥo. So you have a fully vocalized text also.
That is great. I wonder which manuscript he's using, but this is excellent news. Thank you so much. Can you just tell me look, I'll just download this.
I will send you the
or if you want to put it in the chat,
reference.
If you want to put it in the chat, maybe also other people.
I'm very, very thankful. Thank you so much. That simplifies things a lot.
Thank you, Nicolas. And Dan.
Thank you very much. I don't want to keep people too long, but I'm curious about the Jerusalem thing you only briefly mentioned, ever so briefly mentioned in the text, which is curious in writing where they describe pumpkins and whatnot and details of pagan whatever. Other things are so detailedly presented, and suddenly the reference to Jerusalem is just dropped. Is it a common thing in hagiographical text, anything between 8th to 11th century, to have a geography that's far more to the north and the east, and just to chuck in Jerusalem without detail? Is that something that you've seen before in other places?
Not much. Yeah, not much. If anything, saints and their authors are very proud of their connections to Jerusalem and their time in Jerusalem, their prayers and the landmarks they saw and spent time at. Not much. But one thing that I'm going to point out is in the Khatmin trilogy, in the history of the monastery, or hagiographical history of the monastery of Mor Gabriel, the author says going into this monastery 7 times in faith is equal to going to Jerusalem. So I think there was a broader, in the monasteries of Turabdin and perhaps elsewhere, it seems to be a broader inclination to promote those local monasteries and sideline a bit the authority of Jerusalem. I don't know many other examples, but I can think of that one text that explicitly and very quantitatively competes with Jerusalem. But this is still a very short, even in that, like even when I can see that broader pattern, this is still a very surprisingly, interestingly short mention. So I think the author was just not interested. The author was interested in that local environment and perhaps the rivalries in that region, and he did his due diligence by putting a Jerusalem episode there very briefly. But he was just more interested in the plants and in the vine fields and in everything else that was happening immediately around those monasteries. Even the cross episode, I think, might be a later addition due to that Syriac and Armenian perhaps exchange and rivalries, and because it just doesn't make sense. Suddenly he just leaves for the cross, comes back for Constantinople, comes back, uproots a tree, and then we don't hear about the cross anymore. So it looks such a like an interpolation. And even that might be a later edition. I don't have proof for that, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if that was the case. So the author again just was mostly interested in the monasteries and how they were connected to each other and what they planted.
Thank you very much, both. And then we have a question by Ekaterina, but first I want to read a comment by David, who says that the Dairoito uses a manuscript by Dairoyo Yuhanon Parmaike. I cannot read. David, do you want to?
Hermes, yeah. It's a copy of the Dolabani manuscript.
Ah, okay, from 1969. So it's in the chat. So thank you, David.
Great, thank you so much, David.
And Ekaterina, do you want to jump in directly?
If possible, just I'm sorry, I was a little bit late. Could you, if possible, just a little bit repeat this episode and what is said about the captivity?
Yes, that is at the very beginning of the story, when so the author says Marcion not only split God into two natures, but also he breached the agreement between Julian the Apostate and the Persians back in the day. So he attacked Persians, as a result of which Persians attacked back under Kesrun, and the commander is Nobun. That's again an otherwise unattested name, and they take a bunch of Christians and a bunch of Romans actually to captivity from Rishʿayno, and the author says some of them were put in the army, some of them were used at the courthouse. So they divided the captives according to their age, gender, and their abilities. So again, a very, very vividly narrated episode. And in that milieu, Aḥo just happens to be given as a young potential soldier to another soldier in the Persian army, and that happens to be a crypto-Christian. Once they realize that these two men, one already in the army, Michael and Aḥo, a new captive, once they realize that they're both Christians, they go up to the Persian king and get Christian uniforms for Aḥo, so that they can serve together. And they served that way for, I think, 18 years or something as crypto-Christians. And I know the life says Aḥo died at the age of 105. So for 100 years, the first 20 years of that was 20 years of that was under captivity. So that's the very interesting captivity bit.
Fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you both again. I think there is a question by Margaret in the chat. Do you want to directly ask it, Margaret? No, she cannot speak. Okay, so we read it. In the local environment, is the local environment there because that is where the saint performs miracles? Miracles are always considered more interesting if there is a lot of local detail, she said.
Miracles are very interesting in this text in in that they are not very dramatic. There are no like demons and demonic serpents. There are demon possessions, but they are all they're not very embellished narratives. Hevoro, for example, his first disciple was mute, and they heal him. And then there are, I think, in two places there are demon-possessed individuals, and they again heal them. It happens to be the same demon, and the demon even talks back at Aḥo and says, "You didn't leave me in Jazeera. I came here, and you found me here." So there's one demon. And the other three miracle is very dramatic, of course, but that doesn't say much about local circumstances because it's mostly a fictional story. It gives that episode gives the names of couple different villages, 4 villages that converted to Christianity after that episode, but I'm not able to identify them on any map, so I'm not sure if they are just fictional villages or if I am looking at the wrong map here, but there is that. The miracles are helpful in a way that each one of them happens in a particular village or a particular house, but other than that, they don't say much. They are very tame miracles of healing most of the time.
Thank you. Before closing, I want to just mentioning that Albert and Nicholas shared other 2 references in the chat, so whoever wants to go back can directly read it in the chat. And we thanks again Reyhan for this very interesting, fascinating talk, and we hope to see you soon again with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for joining today.
Thank you everyone for joining. See you next time.
Bye.